Greetings, friends. Greetings to the Church Leadership Institute for Ministry. We're pleased to welcome friends from across, evangelical friends from Mid-America and from Rocky Mountain here meeting on this June evening. We were hoping for the new friends to come in. I will call them after we get started, but we're hoping for some friends from Northwest friends in Rocky Mountain yearly meetings to join us tonight too. I pray that you are all well, that your summer church ministries are already or will soon get started. Some of us are already having ministries going on that conflict with tonight. I know some that usually come up to Chandler are having Vacation Bible School. But we thank all of you for joining in our fellowship. We're grateful for your presence. Before we have our prayer, I would like for us to keep in mind David Robinson and his family. The memorial service for his mother, Betty Robinson, will be June 15th at North Ridge Friends Church. So let's keep them in mind as we open with prayer tonight. Almighty God, we do pray for David Robinson and his family as they celebrate the life of Betty, who was your faithful servant throughout her life here on earth. We also lift up to you the victims of the disastrous tornadoes, and we know that you are sufficient for all of our needs. And we thank you for these faithful friends who have gathered to share in Christian fellowship and to grow in faith and in their church leadership skills. May we sense your loving presence among us and be guided by your Spirit. May we be transformed by the living Christ, who is our ever-present teacher and Lord. Be with David Wolfe as he leads us. Give him the words you would have him share with us. And may this be a time of honor and praise to Christ our Savior, our divine shepherd, in whose name we give thanks. Amen. Before we begin our Institute session, we're going to welcome Jim Lashana and Lisa Christensen. Jim is Vice President of Academics at Berkeley College. He's Director of the graduate program for Master of Arts in Transformational Leadership. And Jim, would you be willing to introduce Lisa? We will look.
I will.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here with you tonight, and I know that I have met many of you, but not all of you, and I appreciated Dave's prayer, praying both that we would grow in terms of faith as well as in church leadership, I think is the way that Dave termed it. And I know that many, if not all of you, are aware of the Master of Arts in Transformational Leadership program. I'm sure that Dave Kingery has talked about it. In fact, I know that he has, and Dave Williams has spoken in front of you before, and I'm sure that you heard a little bit from him about this wonderful program. I want to let you know that this would be a great time for those of you who have thought about the Master of Arts in Transformational Leadership program, or you've considered that maybe someday that this would be a good next step. I want to affirm in your thinking that indeed this graduate program here at Berkeley College is something that would be a great kind of a next step. As you are a part of this program, the Leadership Institute, to continue to grow and develop in your leadership, the Master of Arts in Transformational Leadership program here at Berkeley is designed to do that same thing, but taking it to the next level. We have 2 tracks today. We graduated our first cohort from the Spiritual Formation track. Dave Williams gives direction to that, as as the director of that program. And it's especially designed for those who feel called to vocational ministry as pastors and missionaries, although there are others who come and are a part of that program as well. And it has a special focus with using this WebEx technology each week and face-to-face time in Colorado at Quaker Ridge each semester. And so it's a wonderful program. The other program that we started less than a year ago is the one that they invited me when they hired me last August to come and be grafted into this ministry. It's the Master of Arts in Transformational Leadership Professional Studies track. This is the program that is 100% online. It is asynchronous, which means there's never a time when all the students are online at the same time, which has some distinct benefits. For those who are in working professions or who have busy schedules, it allows students opportunity to be a part of the program at their convenience, at their own schedule. And it moves through. There's never more than one class that a student takes at a time, but there are 3 consecutive classes that students take to fulfill the semester. Both programs are 2-year programs if you continued on in the programs, taking 9 units each semester. And maybe the best thing, before I introduce Lisa to come just so you can get to meet her, one of the best things is that just this year, the Board of Trustees here at Berkeley College approved giving at least the potential. We are allowed to give a potential of $4,000 in scholarship assistance to each student who demonstrates need and applies to the program. And so that is good for you to know. Last year, that was only true for the professional studies track. This year, that scholarship is extended in the sense of being available to students in both tracks. The upcoming semester this fall is mid-August. And so I'm going to invite Lisa to come and just to introduce you to her. She is our graduate admissions assistant, and let her introduce herself and a little bit more about the deadlines. If someone wanted to apply, what would they do?
Well,
And you can see yourself right there.
Okay. Good evening. As Jim said, I'm Lisa Christensen. We are just really excited about beginning the classes that are starting. They'll be starting mid-August. And so we want to try to have all your application packed in by the 1st of August. So it would be really good to try to get started sometime in July. And the first thing you would want to do is go on our website and fill out the application. You can also contact us, call us, email us, either way, if you have any other questions, or even if you know somebody else that might be interested, that we could talk with them and share with them. So.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And so just again, you can go onto the website at berkeleycollege.edu, and you can find out all of the information there. And do give Lisa or myself a call if we can be of help. Thanks, Dave, for letting us take just a couple minutes, and blessings on you in your continued leadership adventure.
Thank you, Jim and Lisa. We are blessed to have you here, very blessed to have you here. We're grateful for your presence and your ministry. And I'm not even sure that Jim and Lisa know this, but some of our former and current participants in the Church Leadership Institute now have their master's degree.
Ah, wonderful.
Yeah, so, and there are more on the way. There are some in the program now who will have their master's degree next year. So if you want to get your master's, Berkeley's the place to do it. Of course, I believe in Berkeley College. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Now we welcome David Wolfe as our teacher in Crisis Ministries. I've known David since before his days at Fringe University. Actually, David was a worker at Camp Quaker Haven in Indiana, but he was at Fringe University when I was there, and then at Wichita State University, where he earned the master's degree.
I'm there. Okay, I got it. Talk to you later. Alrighty.
Bye.
So Clark McQuigg, you want to mute your mic? Thank you. Presently, David is working on his Doctor of Ministry at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, but he's still a true friend at heart. He's a friend's missionary in that Presbyterian seminary. I ministered many years in Western Yearly Meeting with his father, Clifford Wolfe, who was a Friends pastor. David himself was a Friends pastor for many years. He was at Ball State University and then at Friends Memorial Church in Muncie with emphasis in Christian Ed. And then at the Winston-Salem Friends meeting in North Carolina. He's been a hospital chaplain in Virginia at Via Christi, St. Francis, Wichita, and now he is head of chaplains at, I guess the term would be director of chaplains at Salina Regional Health Center. David has also done mission work in Iran. He's a member of University Friends Meeting. You need to meet his lovely wife, Linda. They're the loving parents of 3 talented grown children, Abigail, Joshua, and Andrew. We welcome you. We thank you, David, for being our teacher. I will mute my mic, and you go ahead and unmute your mic, and we're on our way. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Thanks. I have fond memories of Indiana and Western Yearly Meetings and summer camp at Quaker Haven Camp. That's been a while, though. That's been a while. I'm so glad to talk to all of you and be here with you. I have a passion for ministry, particularly in crisis and times when people are having a hard time in those transition points in their life. And I hope I can provide some resources for you that will make a difference in your life and your ministry. My wife is serving a congregation here, and both of us are a clergy couple. My youngest son always was afraid that the ministry gene was in his system, and he was always afraid something would zap him one day and think he'll have to go off to pastoral ministry. We'll have to see. He's still a work in progress. I'm going to go over here and start my slide presentation. I see that we have people here from Miami Friends and Faith Friends. I'm not sure where that's at. Randy's down in Liberal. And it's good to have a whole variety of settings in which we come. One of my passions is getting together and talking and getting acquainted with all the little hospitals that we have around, because the pastors in more rural areas are some of the key people that do pastoral care and spiritual formation work within the hospital setting. Let me turn on my first slide here. What I like to ask is, what will make these 2 hours together worthwhile? Can I take away something I can use? That's what adult learning is. If you get one little jewel out of this whole presentation, or maybe get some better comfort level in what it means to go into the hospital and serve, or into any crisis. And we're going to talk about crisis in a few minutes as well. What will make me more comfortable in helping people in crisis? That's what we're after here this evening. And then you might want to know, and we've kind of alluded to that, what's David W.'s credentials, and has he walked in my shoes? Has he been a pastor? Have I tried to, have I understood what it means to walk with people, to be a presence for Christ in other people's ministries, and have I helped people nurtured into ministry? All these things are important to me. I've spent a significant time training volunteers and lay folks in ministry, so in how to be ministering in the hospital setting, which is a real passion for me. Now, the big question is, can you trust anyone Dave Kingery has nurtured into pastoral ministry? That's always a question mark there, but he was one of the persons instrumental in getting me to seminary after I was finding it less than fulfilling to be in government. So it was a city administrator, and I said, I think there's something more in my calling than doing this. I would like somewhere along the way we talk about what your congregational settings are. and what kind of hospitals are around, what kind of homes that, when do you spend most of your time going into people's homes? And visitation ministry, do you go to the hospitals? How about retirement communities or nursing homes? What are the places where you meet people in crisis? And we're going to talk right now about what does it mean to be in crisis. Let me tell you what my first experience of ministry was in crisis. I'm sure I had it before this, but the one that jumps out at me is this. We moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina to be pastors at Winston-Salem Friends Meeting. And when I got there, Linda got there, we were given a list of people that were in the hospital or failing health, and you want to prioritize those folks, get acquainted with them, get on board so that you're working with them and know them before something really serious and significant happens further. So we were out taking our list and finding where people lived, and we got to one house, the very first one, and there we pulled up and looked across, and there in the driveway was the hearse. And we decided we better have a prayer right then and there between the two of us. We held hands. We got real fervent. Somehow the Lord you really get in touch with the Lord when your first pastoral visit is one when they've just called the hearse and hospice is there. And so we went in and ministered to the family. Those were some of our best friends from then on. We had really had a deep relationship with that family. It's like we earned our spurs with that family. And so that's a real joy for me. And ever since then, I've thought, well, my gosh, if you can minister to people in their times of crisis and do that well and be for them be a non-anxious presence, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, then you're in a good place. Then you're doing what you need to be doing for them. And weaving within that the change of worldview that we all are in process to be more like Christ. These are really important things. And in crisis, sometimes people are broken open the most to learn something new and to get closer to Christ. Now, what's the pastor's role? And I'm going to give you 3 things that I see from the setting as a chaplain in a hospital. Pastors come into my hospital. They come into hospitals, and you know that. You visit there. It's one place that's a focal point for all the pastors. And pastoral care is a universal language for many of the denominations, almost all the denominations, that transcends theology. And so it's a real blessing to have pastors come in, stop at my office. We talk about the people they have in their congregation and what the crisis that's going on in their lives. The first thing I think we could say is we, in a very deep and abiding way, are representations of God's presence. When you go to the hospital, when you go to a home, you're both a legitimizer. You're also saying that we value as a family. We also say you're not marginalized. You are being thought of by the whole body of Christ in our congregation. You represent Christ in God's presence and remind people as if they are in the middle of the desert in exile and they have that pillar of light that goes before them. And you represent that. That's very important. And to be there sometimes and not say very much may be something that when a person's in crisis, they say, wow, you were just wonderful. And you think, well, what did I really do other than be there for you? The second point here, and I heard this on a video that I present to all the new employees at the hospital, and it's being available when someone wants to make peace with God. Often in crisis, people get in touch with, where am I at with God? What's the meaning and purpose of my life? Can you help me as pastor sort this out? And can I make peace with God? And we help them walk through that. What does it mean for them? And the uniqueness of our role is they're going to come to us probably. They're not necessarily going to come to the nurse. They want to, or a doctor or some other healthcare person. They want to, what does the pastor have to say about it? Now, sometimes we think maybe we're the last person to hear certain things. People can be embarrassed or ashamed, and they don't want their faith community to know everything about them. So they do come to the chaplain sometimes instead of the pastor, because then they can just let it all out and not worry about we're getting back about the things that they're most concerned about. But most of the time, when someone wants to make peace with God, you're the person to do it. And often that's in the time of crisis. This is something I've been mulling over in my mind, and I heard this recently. Sometimes we are storytellers. When we're in a pulpit, we tell the story of faith. Those stories are so rich, and they carry the values of our faith. But often in crisis, we're a story catcher. We are there to listen to other people's stories, to hear what they have to say. And I'm going to talk a little bit about active listening. That's feedback to the patient, to the person that's your parishioner, person of your congregation, asking them and probing and asking questions about that story, helping them to feel heard by you and getting their story out. Because sometimes as we talk out loud, we hear what we're saying, and it solidifies and it consolidates the truth that we have, each one of us has. So those are three things I think are real important about the pastor's role that just no one else really can fill. So what's the first thing you need to ask yourself before you go to a setting where you know the family's in crisis is, what's your purpose for visiting? Who do you represent, and are you ready for the visit? Let me go back and say just a few things about it. When I train volunteer chaplains, or go to a deacon's board in a congregation, I will say, think about what you're trying to accomplish when you go there. Sometimes what you're trying to accomplish is to bring back to the congregation word about the problems and the burdens that someone is going through and suffering through. If it's in the hospital, you get permission from the patient to share it with the congregation. You need to do that. Another thing is that when you're going there, you are like representing the church. You're representing their congregation. And I think the third thing that you do is you are the legitimizer of that person. There's an old Statler Brothers song in which this guy has in mind a woman at an inn that he wants to go have an affair with, and he tells about all the good things in his life, and yet he's still got this woman on his mind. And the thing he says is, the pastor came by. And it struck me when I heard that song is, that means I'm a good citizen, I'm beloved by my church, I'm someone of worth. And people need that sense when they're in the hospital, when they're going through crisis. They need an anchor. They need their faith community as their anchor, and you represent that. So, whom do you represent? You represent God. You represent the faith community. And sometimes you are the person that can pass on word. Such and such is asking about you. Your friends were concerned about you. Such and such is going to come by and visit you as well. Can we do something for your family member? I remember once being very touched by a patient in the hospital, that patient's wife. And she said, my neighbor didn't just ask me, she came by and put in the refrigerator of my house milk and the necessities that I just don't have energy to go to the grocery store for. All of those things that help us know that we're valued, especially people in crisis, that they're valued. And the third thing is, are you ready to visit? I'll tell my chaplains, my volunteers, go into the chapel at the hospital, spend some minutes in time in prayer, find out what's on your mind and you're burdening you, and turn those over to God and let them be. When you go down that, you don't need to be telling them about your problems, except in a very short, crisp way to say, well, you know, we're all in this together. And that's always your purpose for sharing your own stuff, is to say, yeah, I do have burdens, but, you know, let's talk about yours. Now let's go to the idea of what is a crisis anyway. You might be in crisis when, I like that because it's close to, you might be a redneck when. I always used to like to look at those kind of things. You might be in crisis when some event, some trigger event, is beyond a person's or a family's ability to do several things. One is to deal with the situation. We got something that's here and we don't know what to do about it. Or there's uncertainty in it and we can't fix this. We got too much time on our hands. We're worried about it. For instance, they've been diagnosed with cancer, and they don't get there and they can't find out the exact diagnosis. They're going to have chemo. They're going to have surgery. That time of between time before surgery is so awful. That's one classic. To find out what people are burdened by, that they feel they're compromised in dealing with. The second thing is to sort out the meaning of a new situation. I'm trying to think of a good example for that. One of the things I think is so important is to know that we as humans need to have meaning. We'll make it up. In a vacuum, rumors run rife because someone has to make up why they think something's happening. We had a hit and run here in our town Friday. A woman was out biking with a bunch of other folks, and she got ahead of them, and she was hit. Whoever hit her left her in the ditch. She died there. People came by finally and found her, brought her to the hospital, and she was dead on arrival. We waited for her family to come. We were really anxious ourselves, the whole staff was, about how would this family was going to deal with this, with teenage kids, a woman in her 40s, a very classic case where even the staff was saying, oh my, this is not what we'd like to have. And this is not, and we were mad already by the time that the family got there, at whoever did this. And we were trying to sort out in our minds, we were grabbing for the least little story or least little piece of information from the police or somebody else. And today we had to sit down after it all unfolded, after the person that had done it was apprehended, and we still don't understand why. We had to sit down and process because we had a sense of moral, we were just morally offended by the situation. And that begins to work on you. If you can get over and over a time when you just think something is just wrong. And so we as humans want to find meaning in things. And when people come into the hospital, the first thing, if it being in the ER, is such a prime time to be anxious and need to have someone there to support them, to sort out the meaning. What is this going on with me? Why do I feel this way? Does my loved one have a problem? What kind of problem is this going to change our life? If this is something very serious, this healthcare crisis is, or having to go to a nursing home. All these things change, there are change points, and during those change points, people are the most vulnerable. Now, change is not just for the bad, but sometimes for the good. Someone is eligible to get out of the intensive care unit. They're doing so much better, but they go out to the floor and they're saying, am I going to do better in the next step? Am I going to get taken care of like I did before? Am I going to get the rehab I need? Is there something going on? What is it what am I going to find in the next situation? We all need those kind of things that help us to deal with the meaning in life. And you can be one to sort that out and help them sort that out. Sometimes you'll get a family in the waiting room of an intensive care unit or the waiting room in a nursing home and their loved one's not doing well, or some crisis just happened, someone's had an auto accident, and you sit around and everybody else in the group knows the story. So they know everybody else knows what's going on, and they don't have any compulsion to say anything, but they need to. So you start asking questions as pastor, and you're getting them to tell the story so that they can put meaning into the story. Well, I heard over the radio that, she was driving this way, and, I heard from cousin that said she didn't feel very good this morning. And I heard that maybe the doctor had come through and talked to some of the family, talked to some of us, but some of us don't know everything that's going on. So, and as you, as a pastor, can be the person on the outside asking about things, and then the story just begins to unfold, and everybody gets to add a piece to it, and it begins a process of healing through a better sense of the meaning of what's going on. Okay, and the third thing is, can we cope? Not only can we deal with it, but can we cope? A lot of times, the night before surgery, one of the big questions people ask is, or the thinking, can I handle the pain? Can I cope with the pain post-surgery, particularly bypass, significant kinds of surgeries, hip surgeries, different things that are going to make you think, can I handle this? Can my loved one handle this? These are all things that You, as a pastor, can help them get to a better place. And of course, prayer is going to be one of those big things. You get them in touch with their feelings, you get them closer to God, they begin to feel like they belong to something. They're not isolated. They're not just alone in this world and dealing with it. People feel very lonely if they're the patient because even their family members are not exactly going through what they're going through. So, everybody can say all the kind words in the world, but they're the ones going through it, and they know it. So we don't want to be cavalier about throwing out trite phrases, but being there with them in their time of need is the key thing, and helping them say, let's talk about what's going to happen next. What's your worst fears in this? Can you tell me what's going on tonight? Can we have a prayer before you go to sleep and just turn this over to God? Can we put it in God's hands and ask God to allow you to have a good night's sleep? Remember, stewing over this is not going to do any good. We need to turn it over. We remind people of their faith because in a setting that is uncomfortable and new, we begin to have doubts and we aren't as concrete about where God is in this. And then when you walk in the door and remind them their faith, that is very both therapeutic and it's God action taking place. All of these suggest that one of the big things that we can help folks with is when they are in times of uncertainty. The pastor stands with the people through their uncertainty and representing the church, representing God, representing Christ, representing the Holy Spirit working and still at work in the world. People need to be reminded of that in their times of crisis. So what's a crisis? Well, sometimes we need to come in and look at the world through their eyes. Sometimes I'm always looking at it through my eyes. I go to the nurse and I say, what's going on here? And I hear what the doctors and nurses are saying, and I go in the room, and it's totally different from what the patient feels or their family feels. So often I'll go into a room of a patient, and I don't want to know what the medical staff is saying. I want to hear what they have to say. I don't want to be biased with what I think really is the reality. I want to be biased by what they think. So, a crisis is in the eye of the beholder. It's a crisis if someone feels it's a crisis. It's a crisis when someone connected to your congregation decides that the resources to handle an event are questionable. Your task is to be able to view this same critical event both through their eyes, and I'm going to talk about this later, about the different places you need to be touching base with inside yourself and make an assessment, to view this same critical event without letting it overwhelm you in order to minister to those involved. Now, this is hard. I remember walking with one of our pastors in Mid-America yearly meeting after the death of a couple, key people in the congregation, after an auto accident. The pastor had three things going on, three roles in his congregation that he played with this family. First of all, they were his friends, and that their death hit him in a personal way. Second of all, they were leaders in the congregation. So, it was like I got two places here. One is my own grief, and one is, wait a minute, they were integral to the congregational life. They were almost my colleagues in ministry. They were the colleagues in ministry. And thirdly, the people that are surrounding them are also hurting. And so I'm ministering to the wider community. And I'm trying I guess the third thing would be, I'm planning worship services and helping other people grieve, and I'm grieving myself. So there is that chance that we'll be also overwhelmed. And you've got to be in touch with, how's this affecting me? When one of your congregation is asking you to be pastor, and some of it is your own issues, your own concerns, your own burdens mixed in with that. To be in touch with that is really important. to be in touch with that's important, to be a caregiver, to be a minister. Now, I want to just briefly tell you about one model of crisis counseling. And that, I think the key point is going to be number B here for you all. First of all, and maybe A, when we go out and we are with people and there's a crisis, we need to go out and develop and maintain our contact with them. Sometimes we're real hesitant to impose ourselves on somebody, especially if the peripheral of the congregation. But if we are caring and low-key and seek to find out what's going on with the couple or the family that's having the crisis, then that's the first key place, to connect and stay connected. Don't withdraw. Don't be threatened if they act and have all kinds of moods. If you see them angry, if you see them sad, don't feel like you're the one that has to fix that so much as be there with them and to maintain contact with them. Sometimes the people in our congregation that are either the most aloof, excuse me, or somebody that you may not get along with, or they may not trust you. Sometimes we have conflicts within our congregation with certain people. But the key thing is to maintain and develop the contact with them, particularly in a time of crisis. To stay in relationship is so important. Even if there is a tension between you and them in any other circumstance, or if you disagree on the way the church should be run, or if they talk about you behind your back, or they talk in the parking lot, we all have somebody that we know probably would just as soon have another pastor there rather than us. But when we're in crisis, and any time really, to develop and maintain contact is so important. The second one is identifying the problem and providing therapeutic interaction. What are the concerns that this person is expressing, and how can you be there for them and help them in those circumstances? Can you name what you're hearing and feed that back to them? That's so important to be able to do, for you to know what the bottom line problem is. Let's say someone comes to you hear of somebody going into the hospital, and you go there and they are, let's say a lady fell and broke her hip. You don't know exactly all of the issues that are most concerning to her. She may be not only hurting, but she may be pretty ticked at herself for falling and getting hurt. Sometimes we beat up on ourselves, especially when we feel foolish about it. Secondly, she may have a dog at home, and she may be thinking, who's going to take care of my puppy? What if I have to go to a nursing home? And third, she may be saying, can I afford this? There are so many underlying concerns, and it's helpful for us to be able to know what concerns a person has. I sometimes I ask a person when we're going to pray at the end of the time of my visit, I say, well, do you have any burdens I might not know about that you would like me to pray about? It's really important to know what's the problem, and then how can we be helpful in that. And the third one is to help people not solve the problem, but feel like they have the resources to cope and deal with it. There will be another day. This model was developed for pastoral counselors from a therapist by the name of Adler, and so this is kind of a more secular model, but it's also really what crisis counseling is about. It's the structure of it, and to keep that in mind. And I think the best one is identify what truly is their problems, and then help them get to a place where they can cope. Sometimes that means bringing some family member to be there with them from out of town or somewhere. I hate to see someone in the waiting room by themselves, especially in the emergency room. I like to have family or somebody from church or some friend there for them. I want to look to see what kind of support system they have. Wow, now I need to come up for some air here. Let's see what the next slide has. The pastoral tasks of a caregiver. I think I've already alluded to this first one. People need to connect with God and their faith community. That's one of our tasks, to help them do that. To remind them that such and such is thinking of them, Just remind them of where God is with them, to find out what rituals, even we Quakers have rituals, even what kind of things are meaningful to them. Is it reading a scripture? Is it reciting the 23rd Psalm? Is it maybe listening to some good music, bringing a CD player and having them listen to some good, I don't know, gospel, or listen to, I just got to tape some Christian gospel bluegrass from North Carolina that spoke to my condition. And I think sometimes when people are in turmoil, to feel like there's some solid ground on which to stand, not sinking sand, as you know the song. We're next after also to identify the spiritual and emotional needs of somebody. To find out from other family members, what do you know that's going on with your loved one? We'll talk about going to the nurse's station and and I'll talk about the systematic way to do that. But it's so important for us to be able to identify the spiritual and emotional needs of our parishioners and people that come to our congregation and worship with us. Third, identify the values of a family or the culture or community. Now, let me say something about these three. Throughout history, most of history, Christians have majored in that first one, that pastors help people connect with God. Then, in the Reformation, we began to take on scientific methods of learning about what motivates people, what grief is, what the stages of grief are. And those things then add analysis to. Not only are we trying to connect people to God, but we're also trying to analyze what will be helpful in this person's circumstance. And finally, you can't assume just because you believe something about the role of the pastor or people's lives, that family may have a whole different take on that. You got to explore the culture out of which someone comes. American Indian culture, you don't name the disease because that gives power to the disease, like the Hebrews believed. If you name something, then that actualized that. That's why the name Israel came about. It renamed the father of one of the patriarchs of the church, and gave him a new identity. It was so powerful to name something. And so Indian culture you don't say that the person's got a certain disease. The role of what role people play in the family structure. If you're in Hispanic culture, in a Muslim culture, for instance, I'm using an example that you don't have in our church setting, but you go to the father figure, the male figure, to talk about the family situation. And some cultures, everybody comes to the hospital. Some cultures, just a few people come. Some people believe you should not be bothered you don't want to bother the pastor, and other people think the pastor should be at their beck and call. So you've got a whole bunch of different values in families, and you need to sort those out and think about them. Some of those will come natural to us, but I think it's important for us to name them here. So, what is the settings that present themselves as opportunities for crisis management? What might you imagine as settings for crisis? For me, the primary one that I'm in is hospital. You go to the hospital when you hear of a crisis. You might need to go to someone's home before they get to the hospital, or there's something going on, an emotional issue, or someone's grieving over something, and you go to the home to support the family. Or a nursing home. Now that's a place which is hard, so depressing sometimes when people have to make those transitions. People are lonely and they need us there. The crisis is one of, what meaning do I have in life? I don't, maybe. And finally, the church. Someone comes to your office and says, I want to meet you at the church. I want to talk about something. I got a burden. I got a faith issue. Crisis takes in all those kinds of places. And finally, sometimes my wife tends to believe that, your zip code is what you need to know. You need to know all the people in the community and in your zip code and know what the needs are. So in the little town of Gypsum outside of town here, she's pastor of one of the Methodist churches there. And so she goes down to the place where the gun shop. She goes down to the place the men have their moonshine. She goes down to the old grocery store, and she goes down to the restaurant until it closed because the health department shut it down. All of those kind of places, and also the repair shop and the gas station, to know all those people. And so you may be sitting down there and someone will just say, hey, listen, Pastor, I need to talk to you. And this is not a member of your church. And this is not someone you know their real story. Or, boy, they're pretty close. You may know about it from somebody else. But you may have crisis. If you're out there in the community, you may have people coming to you and saying, I've got this going on. The other night, the neighbor across the street got in a fight with his former wife's son, who has an alcohol problem. And they come over to our house for us to sort it out for him. And we had to say, wait a minute here, guys. We don't get in the middle of this. You don't really want us in the middle of this. You're not asking. You don't act like you really want us. You just want to argue. And so finally we ended up having to call the police and sort it out, and they both got hauled off to jail. And, of course, today we're catching up with one of them and the other one and seeing what's going on with them. But, well, we had to get them split up. That's crisis. That's crisis ministry. Well, what can you do to help yourself prepare? The key thing I think that chaplains have in the hospital setting is we know the setting, and we're comfortable in that setting. And we're not so much, we know the people there. It is in your interest every time you go to the hospital or the nursing home to stop and talk to everybody. Get acquainted so that you're known. Get acquainted with the dynamic, the kind of the cadence, the daily schedule in a hospital or a nursing home. You need to have that. It will help you when crisis comes along to facilitate and be there for the people that are in the crisis. The second one is to understand the emotions of crisis. You know that to identify and say it's okay, you're angry one minute and you're wounded the next minute, and just to watch the different feelings that people are going through so you can address them. We had a person we had a patient come into the hospital, DOA. She was on the bike and she got hit in a hit and run accident. And her husband came in the hospital and he went through 4 or 5 different emotional states within a few minutes. One, I had to say to the staff came in and talked to him and said, she's probably brain dead. And when they said that, 2 or 3 things. One, he got mad for a second. The next second, he just leaned over the bed and wept. And in a few minutes, it seemed to me like we as the staff needed to give him some time alone. He needed some private time with some of the family members in that room. And so I asked him, would you like to have us leave and you just have a moment alone with your wife? And she'd already been pronounced dead, so he knew that she wasn't going to get better. And he said yes, and I could feel the relief come out of him because I could read his emotion. Within 15 minutes, he was out of the room, and he was standing there talking on his cell phone, and he was the next police officer, and you could see him getting up ahead of steam. He was just angry at that time. Let's catch this guy. What's going on? What are you guys doing to investigate this? And that got some of the other police officers kind of, they were also beginning to get angry too. And so we were dealing with the crisis of a whole bunch of folks and that whole dynamic there. But to be a non-anxious presence was sure important there. And to read the emotions and just accept them and to know it's okay to come through those emotions. Another thing is understanding the dynamics of grief and loss. And you've heard Kubler-Ross and, the stages that you go through to end up with acceptance. But those are, those can be so intermingled. There's other grief reactions. There's other things that people need to do if they're stuck in their grief and loss. It's behooves you to read some of those and identify those and see those and trust those, and to be trained in those somewhat. That's why I always advocate volunteer at the hospital, your local hospital if you can, because you'll get to see situations where most of the time you may be winging it when you get into a crisis because you haven't been there often enough. But it's good to know those things and study those kind of things. Learning what to say and what not to say. And there's lists of things, but know that the real essence of ministry is not what you say and what you don't say, but is you willing to hang in there and be a presence. It's rather than the right words. There's no fancy words that you can say a lot of times in a crisis. Just being there is key. So, I'm going to see if, hold on a second, let me look here. I think we're about needing time to get to intermission or some downtime in a few minutes. Dave, let me go through this slide and then we'll take some downtime and maybe some questions. And if someone wants me to head in a certain direction, please let's go that way. I like to do that even better than I do talk off of this. What is therapeutic? There was a guy named Karkoff and Truex, a team, and they said these things all therapists have in common and they're good at. The first thing is to have a non-anxious presence. Don't let your anxieties be translated into others. Be there for folks. Don't carry your own anxiety into the circumstance. The second one is be empathetic and try to understand what they're going through. To be curious about what another person is going on within them. And the third one is, and I like this one, I wouldn't have thought of this until I read this years ago, a non-possessive warmth. No strings attached. You're there for them. They can be angry. They can have any feelings. You're not expecting these folks necessarily to behave in a certain way. You're not asking them they got to come to your church if you're there for them. It's a non-possessive warmth. And be a genuine presence. That is, leave all your stuff at home. Understand how to be centered. Work on your own issues, your own anxieties, and come there without those being front and center. And finally, awareness of one's own agendas. We need to know why we're there visiting them, and to know if we've got something going on in our life that we want to, we've got to just know why we're there and what's going on inside of us. It's worth being fairly reflective about what triggers issues within you. One of my chaplain's wife, he was a hospice chaplain at one time. His wife died, cancer patient, and he just realized when he went around certain people that reminded him of his wife, he just could not minister to them. So I'm going to stop right now and ask Dave to take over and see if we got some direction you want to go, because I'd rather go in your direction than mine. Thank you.
David, you've given us a tremendous amount to work on and to think about, all of which is very helpful. Are you partway through your PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, I think I got 2 slides, but we can go on to this. This is halftime. Where's the popcorn, Dave, is what I put down. Everybody, did Dave provide you with popcorn out at your site?
Well, we have cookies and some kind of special goodies here. We've got all kinds of goodies here. So I welcome you all to come and bark it out.
That doesn't make me feel good at all. Hit Dairy Queen afterwards.
Okay. David, are you hoping that we might have some discussion after?
Yeah, I would like that, because I get to run.
Do you want to complete your PowerPoint and then have a discussion? You name it.
I think let's take 5 minutes.
We'll take 10 minutes for refreshments. We can't get ours eaten in less than that.
Let's do 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. I may flash through some things, and then I want to give some. Well, let's tell you what. When we come back, let's have some dialogue right then, and then that'll set me off in the direction of the last half.
Okay, and if anybody is having any difficulty hearing or seeing, my cell phone's on. Give me a call over the break, okay? We'll see you in 10 minutes. Thanks.
And if they have an issue, a specific situation they want to talk about, those are sometimes richer than having all the having this structure here that I had.
That's a good idea. So be thinking about what kind of a specific situation you might have that we could use, that we could talk about and help one another. All right, we'll see you in 10 minutes.
I'm going to mute here.
Okay, so am I. Getting about ready, David?
I'm sitting here.
You've
I'm fine.
Well, you've given us so much to go on already.
Yeah, it's probably 2 talks, and I just need to flesh it out, but it's fun.
Oh, this is great. This shows you've been at it. You're not an amateur at this one, and I know that from the ministry you gave to Scott when he was in crisis.
Well,
after that
I was so shocked when I walked in that room and said, "That's Scott."
Yeah.
Or, no, I saw it on a Kingery on there, and you know what a scary thing for you guys.
Yeah, well, he recovered mainly from that, but he still has
Some deficits.
Memory deficit.
Yeah.
And it's due to that hemorrhaging in the brain, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you were there, man. You were there. You were doing all the things you said you were supposed to do.
Well, thank you, and appreciate your ministry too.
Thank you. Well, friends, let's come back together. We'll gather again. How do you want to proceed on this, David Wolfe?
Do they have a scenario that someone would like me to do they have a scenario that they would like some advice on, and we can pick it apart? We can talk about how to go. One big thing I want to talk about is how do you go into the hospital. We really did the big theoretical stuff. The next level is what are the tricks of the trade?
Okay, so are you wanting to share some of those tricks of the trade before?
I can do some of those.
You want to do that? Why don't you get some of your tricks out of the way so you have the controls now. See, usually I have the controls and I can shut you up if you get too tricky.
Tricky? No, we won't go into other Quakers. Tricky.
But you have to give me the controls back before I can shut you off now.
Okay, where do you want me to do it at?
No, I don't want you to. I want you to keep it.
Okay.
All right. So why don't you go? if you feel comfortable, go on for a little while longer, and then we'll come back for discussion.
Great. Okay.
All right, I'll mute out, and you take over.
One of the things that when you see a big, large family in the waiting room, and you go, oh my gosh, what's my job here? One of the things you're after is to find the family leaders, strengthen them, and let them help or let them lead the family in taking care of each other. There are usually gatekeepers in a family, and you want to know who the gatekeepers are and the strong people they look to. And if you strengthen that person, then they will strengthen everybody else, and then everybody will think you've done a great job. So don't think you got to take care of everybody. You also want to observe when you go to a hospital and there's a lot of family in grief and they're really crying and everybody's just all torn up. You want to find out how people match up and is everybody being taken care of. Note if there's anybody left out. You might even assign people to go and say, oh, someone's heading off in a direction by themselves. You might want to say to somebody, would you follow them? Would you be with them? One of the best things that you can get a family to do is start to reminisce, particularly if it's a person dying. You get them to talk about their memories and the good things. And the story. You help them create story and tell the story. Those are so important when you're working with a family, a large family in crisis of some sort. And they'll just be so grateful for that presence when you're there. Now, hospital etiquette. I'm going to jump to something else. Well, let me see if it's in here somewhere. I'm going to jump around now. Prayer. I want to talk about prayer. It's a tool. It's also a connection to God. It's also conversation. Prayer is one of our best tools, but it's not to be used just to get yourself out of the door. Though I will say sometimes to a family after I've been there a long time, well, would you like to pray before I go? That gives them the knowledge that you're going to leave. But it also tells them, you think it's time enough and you're ready. And one of the things you need to do before that is to understand what the circumstances are. I've had people over and over say, someone came in and asked me to pray with them before they even know what was going on. And sometimes if you don't know what's going on, put that in the prayer. I don't know all the details. I usually ask a family, once I say, would you like me to pray for you? Would you like to have a prayer together? Then I'll say, and they say yes, I say, well, what would you like me to pray about? And then if they go, well, I don't know, pray for peace on earth, I'll say, well, one of the things I'm concerned about is there's some burden that you have that I might not anticipate. And then you may find out something that you just totally didn't know about. They may be hiding it. It may be submerged. And so you get at some more things that way. Obviously, you're helping them connect to God. That's the most important thing. God is the healer. Through Christ and the Holy Spirit, we are, we're finding how to connect people with Him. That's probably the central core job. But we're also coaching a patient or family. We're also, in that prayer, have the ability to say some things we wouldn't get to say otherwise. Not necessarily sermonizing, but saying, I'd sure like to see if this family couldn't find a place for that pet. And we pray about, and you're adding pieces to the puzzle, and you're letting them hear you give them back. You're actually letting them know you've heard them through the things you pray about, to show you have heard their concerns. And you're also finding out if there are burdens, well, we've already said that have not been expressed. And finally, getting people in touch with their feelings. There's a field of psychology called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. It's kind of blasé by now, but it has some really good things, and they've integrated those into behaviors and psychology. And one of the things they say is, if you get a person turn their head down and talk, that's the place. And when they start praying, the reason you bow your head in part is to get in touch with your feelings. And I more often than not had this tough, strong, stiff upper lip person talking to me, and then when we get into the prayer and they bow their head, man, the tears come, the feelings come, it's cathartic, and it allows them to get in touch with God, because then they're accessing their feelings. Prayer has many purposes. Develop it as one of your best tools. And not just rote memorization. Talking about, it's what Quakers should be best at, talking about the real things of life, not just the flowery language which is fun, but it's the real stuff. It's meeting the road right where you're at, where the patient and the family are at. And I said these cautions. Don't pray just to get out of the room, and be careful when you're asking to visit someone. Well, that's a whole other subject. We'll go back here to the etiquette. Here's what I would say is good family hospital visitation etiquette. Over the years, this is where I've come to. I would say call ahead to verify the patient is indeed in the hospital. If possible, call to the floor and talk to the RN in charge of the patient and find out if the patient is just about to go for tests or medications or about to be given, because within a half an hour you may have a whole different patient based upon whether they're getting their meds, whether they need to sleep, whether they're going out for tests and are worn out. It's always good to check with the RN and coordinate with her. And she doesn't mind that. Especially a patient who hasn't had a lot of visitors. Don't underestimate most nurses' appreciation for you as a pastor or as a member of a church congregation visiting somebody. One of the reasons they call the chaplain is someone will say, this person hasn't anybody to visit them. They seem so forlorn. A nurse cares about that, and assume they do. If you get a nurse that doesn't, just wipe the dust off your shoes and go on. But most of the time they do. Upon arrival, check with the nurse's station and see if you can talk to a patient's RN. What kind of family support has she seen? What do you know is going on? Connect with the nurse. Leave your own concerns at the door. We've already talked about that. Go pray in the chapel, go find a spot, get rid of your own stuff, and then come in and visit with them. Check out the room for appropriate entry. Is it a bad time? What are you seeing going on there? Are they giving the patient a bath? If the door's closed, you better pay attention to maybe they're giving them a bath. Knock on the door, open it somewhat, say who you are, knock again if you don't hear anything, slowly move in, talk as you go in. Check the door for signs that indicate you need to gown up. Put on gloves and mask. Don't barge in until you look at that. Now, I make errors on that. Every one of us will, but pay attention. And you can greet, and then I think there's an etiquette that I teach my chaplains about when you enter the room. In hospitals where there are 2 beds in the same room with 2 different patients, that's a much more complicated situation. And sometimes I will talk to both patients and then say, and then I'll talk to the patient that I'm visiting. But I'll address both of them. When you greet a family, as you come in the room, the first thing you really want to do, though, is focus on the patient. You don't just talk around the patient. Even if the person's comatose, go up and look at them, see if you can talk with them, and then as you look for cues, you may ask somebody something, but you're wanting to make sure that the patient is in your purview and you're trying to understand what's going on with the patient. The sicker the patient, the more intense the unit, the shorter the visit. With a person on a ventilator, I sometimes only say 4 or 5 things. I look for their eye contact to see if they're alert. I'll say things like, you're not alone. The Lord is still with you. I know that this has got to be hard because you can't talk to us, but you're closer to God than us because you can talk to God even in the midst with that ventilator down your throat. This too will pass. That's another thing I say. You can coach people that way. Maybe you don't even know if they ever can hear that, but at some level they're going to take that in. I think another thing is, as you leave, give the unit secretary or the RN your card. Say, call me if something happens. That is, if you really want them to, because they appreciate connections with the community. And if you give them a card, they'll be serious about that. Things happen, and things get lost, and the next shift comes on, and sometimes they don't see it. But it's important for you to connect with those folks too. And there we are with the prayers. And I think it's very good for you to learn some styles of active listening, how to listen to people. When one listens, it increases the appearance of your wisdom. Instead of talking, listening is not a passive activity. It's our hearts and minds along with our ears. And often when the family is grieving, we want to do something to fix the situation. It may not be that may not be what you need to do. Resist that temptation. Don't think first, what solution do they want? What quick solution can I come up with to help this family? You're probably heading down the wrong road if you think you've got to fix something. Advice and solutions often do not help a family feel heard. How not to respond? You can read these. I think I'm going to pass through them. But badgering with questions, dictating action, monopolizing the conversation. I've seen pastors who come in and carry the whole conversation without giving time and space for people to come back and ask to get a hearing of what's happening. You don't just share stories about everybody else. You want to find out what's happening in there. And that means you got to listen to people. And don't be optimistic to a fault. Unrealistic optimism is a turnoff for most people. How to listen. This is body language thing. I'm going to pass that, but this one is a good one. Guidelines for active listening. These are tools. Backtrack. Say, well, you said a few minutes ago something. I'd like to hear some more about that. Paraphrasing. Did I hear you saying, and then you repeat back. Self-disclosure. I have felt that way at times myself, and that burdens me too. Remember, they're the center of things. You're just saying, yeah, I'm with you. I've been there before. Perception check. Now, am I hearing you right? Do I think what do you mean? Well, one of my chaplains was in the psychiatric unit here and this guy said, I'm crazy. I'm going crazy. And Jack said, what do you mean you're going crazy? Tell me about that. Unpack that for me. He didn't use that word, but that's what he was asking. And the guy says, I relive these memories that I have since I took this medication for post-traumatic stress, and I don't even remember things. I blank out stuff. And he says, I abused my children at that point, and I was put in prison for it. And I was later absolved because the medication's what did it. And they discovered that this kind of medication would do this to people. And he says, but I'm carrying that guilt. Every night I have a dream about that. I think I'm going crazy. Now, that was concrete because perception was checked by Jack, one of my chaplains. Open-ended questions. You can ask me some about what I use for open-ended questions. And then what we call advanced accurate empathy. That is thinking what it must be like for that person to be in that place and checking it out and saying, if I were there, I might be. And do I hear what you're saying? I think I'm hearing you say. Those are the kind of things that help move from passive listening to active listening. Let's see if this is a whole new field, and I'm going to start studying this myself. It's a book out called Reflective Listening. It's used mostly for conflict and communication, skill-based building, conflict resolution. But I'm looking at the materials, and it looks really good. If you want to learn something more about, I wanted to introduce you. This is one of the books. And I think, I was doing a sermon last Sunday at a church, and we were using the story of the centurion that's not John's Gospel, it's Luke 7. And if you're doing your soul work, the centurion at some point had to do soul work. And you, as tool of the trade, you need to do your own soul work to be centered and a presence for those folks. I read Eugene Peterson's books on pastoral care. He's, of course, the author of The Message. He just come out a book with his own called The Pastor, and it's his own life's journey. He has some very profound things to say about what it means to be a pastor. I think I'm going to stop, Dave. I think I'm going to share 2 books that I'm going to be using in teaching an online course for the Methodist Church in this conference of Kansas and Nebraska. These are 2 of the books, but I'm going to leave those out. But let's turn back and let's do some dialogue. Let's see where people are at.
Are you hoping, David, that there'll be questions about matters that you've spoken on? Are you hoping for...
Let's ask questions first, and then if someone has a scenario they'd like to bring up, I'd be glad to address that.
All right.
The situation. That's a good way to ask a question.
All right. Why don't I just go down and I will ask David, if you want to mute, then we won't get feedback. Well, if you're going to answer the questions, I guess let me ask the question, then when you're ready to answer it, let you unmute.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go first, and David, I'm ready for feedback. Angleton, is there anybody down there that would like to speak?
During the break, we talked about a couple things, Dave. One was a specific scenario with suicide, where they went to a person's home and she was very, very depressed and suicidal, and just wondered if you had any experience dealing with that. And the other is about youth in crisis. Just any experiences with dealing with the person who's in crisis is a youth. I don't know, child, teenager, whatever. Or then also, if the youth is not the person in crisis, but a child of the person in crisis, or something like that. So just a couple things.
David, before you answer that, let me suggest that if some of you want to get a little bit better picture, you might go into the full screen mode, and you can see a little bit better each one in his or her own location. That's up to you. I'm going to mute David, and you take off with Bruce, responding to Bruce's question.
Great questions. Let's start with suicide. Actually, Dave could answer this one. He's worked as a family therapist, so he could probably do better than I can on this. But just from the kind of quick and dirty, there's 2 or 3 things you want to do. You want to see how concrete someone is about their suicide. If a person's depressed, you want to find out how deeply, if they've had plans for suicide, if they're just thinking about it. Someone that's very depressed is probably not going to commit suicide. It's when they start getting a little better, when they get some energy back, that they'll think about suicide. You as a pastor, if you're worried about the person being depressed, that's the time to get them help. You want to press upon them to either check themselves at the hospital or go somewhere. You don't want to just let them sit at home.
David, sometimes you will just take them to the hospital, won't you?
Right. If you're a pastor, say, yeah, you have to be proactive because they're not willing to do anything if they're depressed.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a pastor to do that either.
Pardon?
Anybody can do that. You don't even
Yes.
have to.
Yes. Get them into a psych consult. Most emergency rooms have a psych consult. And if they're really depressed and you think they've got a plan or a weapon or something going on like that, you've got to make sure, you got to check that one out. I think there's another thing too, and that is if you think, it's marginal, you don't think they're going to do it, but you're not sure, get them to promise you to call you if things get worse and make a contract with them. If things get worse, I want you to call me because I'm going to worry about you unless you do. Or I'm not going to, and never promise to keep a secret about the person's suicidal behavior. If someone says, I'm going to tell you something, but you can't tell anybody, that's a no-go right there. You say, well, it depends on whether you are, whether you're going to harm yourself or someone else. And in those cases, no contract with anybody.
David, I want to respond to what you said. I had a student Purdue University called me, and this is when I was a chaplain there. And he said,
I remember you then.
Yeah, and he said that he was sitting on the windowsill of an 8-story high-rise, and he was ready to jump. So I made a contract with him that he would not jump until I arrived.
Yes.
And when I arrived, I went straight to the outside of the window, and there he was. I talked him out of that. I went up to his room and took him straight to the hospital. The nice side of that story is that I had an email from him 2 days ago, and this was 40-some years ago. So we've had 40 years of life since then.
What a blessing.
Yeah, and another thing is that if I think a person is serious about suicide, I will say, tell me how you have contemplated taking your life. And then you can tell if they've thought about it and they're pretty serious and they have medication, they have a lot of pills at home, or they have a razor blade, or they're thinking of jumping out the window, or they're going to drive their car into a river, they'll tell you about it. And if they've thought about how to do this, that's pretty serious, and you better make a contract with them not to do anything until you get there. Would you agree with that, David?
Exactly.
Now, I think there was a second question. Was there a second question you had, Drew?
Youth in crisis.
Yes.
I like to tackle the child of someone in crisis first. One of the things we know is anytime you come to the ER and some parent has had an accident, or a little child is scared, or a teenager is scared, a young man is scared, woman, the best thing you can say to them is to find out, let them know that they're going to be taken care of. If someone has a mental issue, that's a whole other thing. You need to get the parents and find somebody to take care of the child. But one of the key things for children is, who's going to take care of me? And the second one is, they have the concern, did I cause this? And when I see kids in the emergency room whose parents are in crisis, I will make sure that we get those two questions discussed. I also I had a family in here the other day. The woman had a cerebral bleed in the very bottom part of her brain, is the brain stem, which is where she breathes, where we breathe, all the involuntary things happen. And they basically said today that she's brain dead. But her daughter was there, who was probably early 20s, but acted more like a child. And one of the things I was concerned about was to find out what the real concern she had. She kept saying, we had an argument today. Did her blood pressure go up, and did I cause this? Had the doctor addressed that? The second thing she kept saying was, I don't know what I'm going to do now. You hear that all the time, but you got to unpack it. And the way you unpack that, this person actually, she was the youngest child. Her mother had spoiled her. Her mother had guilt over being bipolar and the way she had treated her, and had 5 husbands at some point in time, during times. And so I didn't know what she meant by that. I didn't know and everybody, a lot of people say that. I don't know what I'm going to do next, I think was the exact words. This woman literally didn't know what she was going to do next, because she was so dependent on her mother. That was going to happen. She was going to be stuck in her grief. And what we're after is helping people not get stuck in their grief. Let them grieve, let them get it out, but don't let them, try to keep them from getting stuck in that. There's a wonderful book on grief by a guy named Crenshaw, and it's just excellent. He steps out what the problems, what the weaknesses are in certain people that tend to help some people get stuck in their grief. And you might want to read some things on that. Okay, you said youth in crisis. We need to unpack that a little bit. I'm not sure. Can you give a better, more specific situation on? And Dave, do you want to react to that? Because some of this is in your therapy area.
No, I want you to go with, I want Drew to just unpack a little bit more of that second question.
All right, one sec, guys. The question is from a youth pastor here, so I think it's more about. Oh, okay, yeah. It was in reference to the point that you made about the crisis being in the eye of the beholder, and how sometimes we may think with a youth, this isn't really a crisis, but to the youth, it is a crisis.
Right.
Am I speaking to that right, Chase? Okay. Yeah, so along those lines.
Yeah. Okay, can I come back, or you want to say some more? Okay. Now, that's pretty important. This is where behavioral health helps us, where psychology helps us. What is a young person going through? We know their mind is not fully developed. We know that they're going to have highs and lows. They're going to ultimatize a lot of things. That means making sure that someone's with them if they have a disastrous breakup in a relationship, they have something you think, well, yeah, but you're going to have opportunities in life to have another boyfriend, or that grade, down the road, that grade will work itself out, or, whatever it is that's really threatening them, or a child all of a sudden that becomes a diabetic, and has to change their lifestyle. They're going to feel things so much more strongly than you and I are, and we're going to think, well, just one, we might say, what's going on? These guys, they're a little histrionic here. Why are they feeling this so passionately? I think one of the big things is to make sure that someone cares, that they know someone cares about them and is walking alongside of them and keeps checking in. One of the best things a youth minister can do is keep in touch. Keep in touch. Know what's going on with them. Check with their friends. Say, I'm calling you. I knew you were down. Tell me about that. Tell me about it. Draw them out. That's hard to do sometimes if a person's really guarded, but most of the time, if they have a good relationship with the youth minister, they'll talk to you before they will their parents. So, you got a spatial role, but stay connected. That's the biggest piece right there. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes. Thank you so much.
I think I'm going to do this reaffirming what you know already, your instincts already are.
I want to ask, some of the rest of you have dealt quite a bit with these issues that we're discussing right now. I know that you have Tom Bousman, Randy Thornburg, Galen Burnett. Burnett, you all have been dealing with a lot of these issues, and several others of you have too. Would you want to weigh in at all on this discussion that we're having right now? If so, I wish you would unmute and we'll take a moment and listen to you.
This is Randy Thornburg. I've had a question in my mind if I'm up for that at this moment. If someone else isn't buzzing in. We offer grief share here. We've done it 3 cycles. No one else around here is doing it. So we do get people with some severe problems, but one of the things that confounds me the most has not really been through grief share as much as it's just been people I've known in the church, and right now we have a couple who lost a baby after just a few days, January 6th. Do you have specific things you'd like to say about people stuck in grief and getting unstuck, or is it better just to give us resources to read? Because grief share addresses it, but they're too torn up to go to grief share.
Yeah, I think, yes, I can talk to that. I've done my homework just recently when a young child just shot himself in the face and killed himself, who was about 9 exactly. And, to say that was everybody in town turned out for that funeral, and the mom is just all to pieces. And the first thing is, there are 2 or 3 steps. The first step is the person just after the just after the death is therapy and counseling are not, and these grief share groups and some of the compassionate friends groups, probably they're not ready for a group. They need to be one-on-one to begin with pastor and probably a therapist. I would say both. That's what we did with this person, the mother particularly. You also look to see what the relationship between the husband and wife is. If that's at all dicey, this will tear apart their family marriage. You got to watch for that. In this case, I think it pulled them together, but I don't know. You know, if the dad's aloof and the mom's taking care of everything and she's mad at him, you know, this could be the thing that pulls people apart. Let me say that here in a mild grief circumstance, when it's a loss but the person just needs to work on some things, there are 3 or 4 things that make a difference. One is that you do something in honor and memory of that person. You commemorate their loss. You do something in honor of that person. You can get stuck in that, especially if there was a conflictual relationship and you feel guilt. Also, you need to name and be able to name the fact that you have ambivalences. How dare they die because I miss them versus I am so glad they're not suffering anymore. It's like when you have a teenager and they wreck their car and the first thing you want to do is make sure they're okay and hug them and hold them, and the next thing you want to do is kick them in the seat of the pants. We have those ambivalences. They need to be named. They need to be looked at. If someone is dependent upon the other person that dies in the grief thing, there's a good chance they can't move on. And they have to be able to find resources to help them establish that they can do things. The woman, the proverbial person who never, man or woman, you know, couldn't cook, or they didn't do the checkbook, or you can name all those things that make, or they were emotionally 2 people tied up and only one person, one ego. Those kind of things are all setups for difficulty. Name what you think's going on, see what the difficulties are, and then there's some tools, and I've given you a couple of those. Help them to commemorate things, help them to name their ambivalences, and see what's keeping them from moving on. You may see that yourself. Tom, you want to come back on that? I mean, Randy, you were the one. Randy, do you want to come back on that?
Those are good things, and one of those maybe we haven't tried. I think the couple will stay together. We quit pushing them to go to grief share. It's been a few months, but you know they weren't. That's
too early. That may be too early.
Yeah, and they're seeing a counselor, but she's reliving it all in nightmares. And if I'd only done this, if I'd only seen that sign, the baby kind of died of SIDS, but but she was with the baby, and so she feels even more guilt because she was there, so she should have prevented it. That kind of thing. And
SIDS is awful for that. SIDS is awful for that, because then your grief expresses itself in, what if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? And you can say things to help with that, but she's missing that child so badly that she can't move past that sometimes. Let's see, you said something else I thought was important. Yeah, I'm glad you have them where they're at. That sounds good. Have you checked to make sure that they can't move on because they'll feel guilty if they do move on? You know, sometimes if we think we're going to lose the memory of that child, we may keep ourselves stuck in a spot. Think, well, if we move on and begin to enjoy life again, we're not honoring that child. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I can ask them about that. We've had them over to our house and, you know, talked with them and everything. And
just see if they have where their guilt feelings are.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's guilt over. I mean, she's expressed that over and over and over that, you know, somehow she could have stopped it, even though the autopsy showed there was nothing she could have done.
Right. I've seen that happen in all kinds of ways. One thing, I'm losing it here. Reliving things has to be broken. Reliving things is not helpful because the same it's like you're doing it over again. The death scene is over and over and over again. They need to you need to help them through their therapist find a way to break the reliving. We are learning in critical incident stress management, meaning healthcare givers in the hospital setting who have seen too many traumas. We know now that we don't go relive it. It doesn't help the therapy. Don't relive it. Maybe step back and as an adult look at, Randy, you can help them to step back and see it as an adult out of their feelings. What can she, if she is coming from her adult place, and you're going to have to see how to get her there. It's like, instead, as a when you relive an experience from your childhood, you can step back and see it as an adult. But maybe you've never done that before. Maybe you're still reliving it as the child. An adult can see things a little more perspective-wise. That's why a teenager has a hard time doing that when it's a big emotional grief thing, when they break up with their loved one, their boyfriend. But when an adult, if you can help them step back a little bit, that would be helpful. That's hard to do, isn't it? That's hard to do, Randy. That's a lot of work.
Yes, and they're going to leave our area and move back with his parents, and it's very sad. But thank you. I appreciate those are some good points, and I'll go over them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that wants to weigh in on the concerns that Randy has raised, or that have been raised down at Angleton? Or do you have another concern that you would like to share? Tom or Bonnie, do you have anything that you want to add to this, or any question you want to ask? If so, unmute your mic and just go ahead. Tom, you've had a lot of experience in your pastoral work.
Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Well, I just want to make a couple observations. I was involved in hospice bereavement for about 9 years, and I think maybe about three things that I'd like to bring forth. Number one is that whenever there's an extreme situation like a death of a family or even a divorce, the grief period is indeterminate, and we have the idea in the West that we can get over things, and the human emotions really have any. I don't believe in evolution at all, really, but we have not evolved in the last couple thousand years, and we need to allow time for grief to happen, and not try to move people into bereavement too quickly. Bereavement's when they're healing.
Yeah.
And one of the other things is as a pastor, in times of death, people want to be mad at God, but they're afraid to, so they get mad at God's representative, which is us. And so we need to be able to deal with that, and hopefully be able to deal with it as gently as God would, and allow people to express their feelings, share their emotions, and listen to them. And I think try to avoid, I think that's what Dave said earlier, don't tell them that they can get another one. Especially with a teenager, because, 2 weeks of grounding for a 13-year-old is like 10 years in jail for a 30-year-old.
Right.
So we number one, we need to let people express their anger and let them decide when they're going to be through being angry and move on to the next. The stages don't necessarily follow in any special order, but anger is usually the first one. And then let them move to the next one in their time, not on our timetable. And if you've got a family or a husband and wife who've spent 30 or 40 years together, it's a much more, and they're empty nesters. The loss of a spouse is going to be probably more difficult to come to terms with than somebody who has more family around them. And the loneliness is going to be very captivating for them. We need to be able to move in, not to take the place, but to fill the space in part of their day.
Yeah.
That's all.
Amen. Amen. I'm going to put that in my thing. I think there's a whole section to talk about God and how they see God. That would be valuable to put into this whole mix of things we're talking about here. Crisis, where's God in this? What do you think about God? What's your role for God in this? People have all kinds of ideas about what God's going to cause or not going to cause. That is one of the most important things to have dialogue over. Just essential. Mad at God. That should be the title of a discussion. And I would always say that people are bigger pieces of each other the older they get. Just because they're older doesn't mean that they have less need for each other. I agree with you on that. I think one thing I was noticing is our society has speeded up and we want quick fixes. And in the ancient times, they didn't have those quick fixes. They let the widow keep her black clothes on for years too. You know, they kept it on forever. It changed her role, but it also gave her much more time to fill that role of grief. And we don't allow people to do that. And so as a pastor, you're always having to fight that, I think. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I agree with that.
Yeah, good for you. And the hospice work's so important. So important. I was the psychosocial spiritual person for a hospice program. We met every week and we talked about these things. And you're exemplifying what we want to do the best for a pastor going out and visiting with somebody they're assigned to.
I want to say one more thing. If there are caregivers outside of the family that a pastor needs to visit with to help them begin to deal with their grief, I know a lot of nurses who became very connected with their patients over a period of time, and in small towns, there may be people across the street or down the block. Now, in Los Angeles, that isn't the case, but it may be in a small town where you could go and minister to even neighbors or extended family. We tend to make the circle too little and try to get through it too fast, I think.
I agree. Your experience as well. You're fleshing out a lot of things I appreciate.
That's a great suggestion, Tom. We have 5 minutes left. I'm wondering if there's someone else who would like to speak from this, Galen or someone from the Ministry Center. Yes?
Dave Harries in Wichita.
Yes?
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave. I'm sort of confused now with, I heard you say, talking about helping people not get stuck in grief, and then I heard somebody say, well, you let people go for however long they need to. Where's the middle ground there to help somebody get on with their life? I'm stuck now, and I don't understand quite how to get unstuck.
Okay, can I speak to that, Dave? Dave?
Yes, please.
Okay, we got a middle ground. The first part of the thing, the question is, does the person seem like they're going over the same territory over and over again? That's different than a person just wounded, an open sore, an emotional sore. Are they talking about the same things and you sense that they're stuck in those things?
Okay, thank you.
Does that make a difference?
Yes, thank you.
That was a great question, David, and I thank you for it. So, is there anyone else with 4 minutes left? Hearing silence, if you can hear silence, I'm not sure you can hear silence. Not hearing sound, I want to say, David Wolfe, we're grateful for your excellent teaching this evening. You have shared a wealth of experiences with us. You've given us most helpful ideas and resources as we minister to persons in crisis situations. I'm convinced that we need to have you at Barclay College in some capacity, or to do some online things like this for our students in pastoral ministry.
Well,
you have helped equip us for our ministry much better. We thank you, and I am thankful for the ideas and the questions of each of you who participated in this discussion.
Dave,
Yes.
Dave, can I interrupt a second? I put my email address here, both personal and the hospital. If people have questions, obviously they may, you have things in the pastoral care field and the family care therapy area, but if they have nuts and bolts stuff about how to navigate healthcare or things like that, feel free to come my way. It's not an easy thing to navigate healthcare right now. So,
You're very generous in offering that, and I want to suggest that you have to go out of full screen mode in order to be able to see those email addresses. Next month, the very first day of July, we're going to focus on children's ministries. We're going to come from 3 different places. Jody Kinneberg from Northridge, Casey Lingefelter from Haviland, Janet Black from Friendswood, all of whom are giving leadership in children's ministries in their friends' churches. They are going to be our teachers. So we can look forward to that. I'm just reading a text that came through to me. Excuse me for my I have read that text, and it's not, I don't think, something to be announced to everyone. Let us close with a word of prayer. Loving God, as Christ showed compassion on the crowds, so we want to share his compassion with those facing difficult situations in our churches and our communities today. We thank you for David Wolfe, for his teaching, for his hospital chaplaincy. Bless him and his work. Bless the caregivers gathered here in this institute. Bless our churches and their ministries to those in need. Bless the work of our Evangelical Friends Church International. May we bring the healing and the peace of Christ in a troubled and hurting and violent world. For hearing and answering our prayers, for your grace that showers down upon us continually, we give thanks and promise our faithfulness to Christ, who calls us to follow him and to show love to those with whom we have our times. May all glory and praise be yours. Amen.
Amen.
So now let's all go and heal the sick and comfort those who mourn. Thank you again, David. We love you, and we want to hear from you again.
Thank you
all, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you in a month. Good night now.
Be safe from the storms.
Thanks, David. Thank you all.
Night.